Welcome to Inspirational Leadership. I'm your host, Kristen Harcourt, and I'm excited again for another wonderful, wonderful guest. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Daniel Monehin, who is a leading leadership keynote speaker and adjunct professor who uniquely combines his real-life multinational executive experience with a rigorous foundation in academic research. He has over 30 years experience and multiple industries, including S&P 100 and Fortune 500 companies. He graduated with a 5-year doctor in business administration degree from the University of Manchester, where he did his dissertation in crisis leadership. His newest book is The Pragmatic Optimist: 6 Proven Strategies for Leading During a Crisis. And I love this. If we're going to do a nice summary, Daniel helps leaders become a better version of themselves. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Thank you. Thanks, Kristen. Thanks for having me.
So I just have to say, for anybody who's watching on video, we've got the book right here, The Pragmatic Optimist. I loved this book for hundreds of reasons, but I think one of the things I really loved is there was a whole person approach to this, both how somebody is doing this on the individual level, how they're doing with the people around them. And the most wonderful thing is I think everyone should read this book, because it doesn't matter if you have the title of leader. Every day we are showing up as leaders in our lives. And as I was reading through this, I was thinking about a lot of the crises that have showed up in our life personally, right? With things like cancer journeys and losing parents unexpectedly, childbirth and a master bedroom, like all of these things were coming up for me as I was thinking through, as I was reading through the stories and the exercises and the examples that I gave you. So I just want to say, Daniel, it's a wonderful, awesome book.
Thank you. Thanks for your kind words. It's really gratifying hearing that. Being a first-time author, I'm still dealing with how to receive such feedback because I was like, I'm really excited that it's touching people the way it's touched me. And as one of the literary giants said, she's like, if you found a book that has not been written, then that you really want to read, then you have to write it. And that's how the Pragmatic Optimist came about. It was something I was searching for in my journey as a leader that will help me and also develop others, because I've been doing that simultaneously for the major part of my career. And I was finding this gaping hole. So being able to step in with my, piece of work to be able to help bridge some of those gaps, I think it's a very exciting journey, and I'm glad to hear your positive feedback about it. Thank you. Thank you, Kristen.
Yeah, you're welcome. And let's actually start there to help the audience understand a little bit around your journey, because you've been in corporate and had a lot of exposure to many of these things that help you. And I was, even before we were talking and getting live on the show, around, you got to be the observer and see a lot of this in action. So tell us a little bit about your journey and what got you to this work you're doing in the world right now.
Okay, so it all began in 1998. I'll give you the Cold Note version, the podcast version. So it began in 1998. Based on an official assignment, I had to overcome my almost 30 years of fear of public speaking that year. And I overcame it, and all of a sudden began to see the gap that leaders have. Public speaking was just one of them. But the main part, it appeared as though you will do well on a technical level, and all of a sudden they go, yeah, great, you're now a leader, good luck. And the more I studied it, it was as though you're a great, hockey player, and they go, and you spent all your whole life playing hockey, and they go, you're so good in hockey. Here is a baseball bat. You're now the captain of the baseball team of, Toronto Maple Leafs. And they're like, what? that's how dramatic the change is. So I saw that huge gap there, and I decided to step in and fill it. But in doing so, I developed a 3-path approach to getting there. One of it is the one you talked about, the content part, which is like developing the academic rigor and the academic discipline of really understanding the empirical data behind leading generally, and then leading when the heat is on, which is what the crisis, is. And for 22 years, as I was going through management and senior levels, increasingly senior levels of management all around the world, I was like an ethnographic researcher, living with my audience, my fellow leaders, both within the organizations that I work for, the industries at large, and the economy at large, the market at large, and being able to engage with them. And I was saying that, and I was taking notes. I will show you my field notes. So this notebook is about 21 years old. Of course, about 15 years ago, I switched to electronic, but there's still some real gems here. Gathering information on and seeing how leaders were responding to different situations, learning from the good ones and learning how not to lead from those that fumble the ball. So like an insider view of leadership that very few researchers have. So that's what I had for 22 years. And so really, really exciting to be able to bring that together in this piece of work in the Pragmatic Optimist.
And one of the things I love that you were talking about, because you're someone who does the research, but then you're also like, what does that look like? And it just shows your ambition and dedication to things. Because I love that you said, okay, I'm going to look at the best leaders and what are those qualities that I see in the best leaders? And you saw that they're compelling, they have credibility and the content. So then you decided, okay, I'm going to make sure that I do all of that so that I am encompassing all of those things that make a really great leader. So I'd love for you to share a little bit around how did you get those 3 different areas and really grow in them in your world? And then why do you think it's so important for the really successful leaders in the world to really possess those 3 different sections that you talk about?
All right, thanks. So at that time, I was 7 years postgraduate. I was a mid to senior level management, and already had experience in how to develop strategies for organizations. And so if I was going to do this when I grow up, I need a plan, right? So I was like, okay, I think it's time to apply those principles that I use for my organizations for myself. So I sat back, and the first thing you do in a strategy development is an environmental scan. So I did an environmental scan, and I was like, so who are the best leaders that I will want to be like when I grow up, in terms of not be like them in terms of replicate what they do, but being able to replicate and have a similar impact on people. So and I came up with about 35 of them, very successful in their fields, and group. And I now, the more I did the analysis, and I said, hang on, they're not just a monolith. These are people with specific skills, towering skills. And the first group that stood out for me was the compelling group. So these guys could sell snow to Canadians in the middle of winter. they are that compelling. And I was wondering, why is that? And that's because leadership has a lot to do with the mind and psychology. And because the people in that group, they never set foot on the inside of a business school. But whenever they were speaking, those that went to the best business schools would be like taking notes and like, could you say that again? And I was like, what's going on here? I found it weird. Many of them didn't even have college degrees. Or if they had a degree at all, it had nothing to do with business. They never ran anything in their lives. They never created anything in their lives. And I'm like, well, how come they're speaking on leadership and everybody's listening? That's because they understand the power of storytelling. They understand how to connect with the heart and the mind together and reel in their audience. And so so I call that group compelling. They were compelling in their message. And here's the thing also, in leadership development, if people don't believe you, they're not going to take your message. They will just go, oh, yeah, that was a good seminar, and they walk away. But when they believe you, they'll go, I think I need to change this in my life. And they begin to work on changing their behavior, which is the hardest thing to change, your own behavior. So, and they commit to it, and because they believe there's a connection. So that's why being compelling is powerful. The second group that I found were those that I called credibility. So these were people who had been in roles that I'd been in, EVPs, C-suite, CEOs, board members, and all of them, Kirsten, had retired. They were all retired. And they were just like, what else can I do? I've gone golfing, I've gone sailing. What else can I do? Oh, you mean people are willing to listen to me talk about my leadership experience? Okay, all right, sign me up. And so that's how most of them got into leadership development. So Jack Welch will be one of them, right? It was one of the towering examples. There are lots of them, but people who have held leadership roles, who have a track history. You could argue here or there about their history, like Jack Welch, right? But they do have a track record, and that's what gave them the credibility. They've been in the shoes of leaders. They know how it feels. They've handled mergers, acquisitions. They've done the things that leaders are facing, and they can share. But what I found about them was that most of them had only one industry experience, because they weren't thinking of doing this later. They were just building their careers. So that was something that I saw. Then secondly, also, I realized that they were not really compelling speakers. Those that had credibility. And that's because they've always had power. Can you imagine if you're the CEO of GE and you call for a meeting of 2,000 people? The remaining 50,000 you didn't call will be wondering, oh, how can I get on that list? So his audience were always prepared for him. And no matter what he says, they're going to laugh. They're going to go, great speech. You, oh my God, you knocked that out of the park. Right? So most corporate leaders do not go out of their way to develop their speaking skills. And that's something that I found, especially in leaders that I've worked with. So that's the second group, credibility, so compelling credibility. And then the final group were those that were like my dad, who by his mid-20s was already a PhD and an expert, global expert in his field. But Kirsten, he never worked for one day in that field. Just from university, first class, he earned the first class from King's College London, straight to his PhD. And he was just doing academic work. So you find people who had PhD in sociology, organizational leadership, and all that, coming up with models for leadership, but they themselves have never led a Tim Hortons shift in their lives. Right? But they have a model for how Tim Hortons should lead the entire organization. But it's backed up by empirical data, evidence-based data. So it's not like they are wrong, but they have not just tested. They don't know how this looks like in real life. For you to be in the hot seat, for you to have your quarterly earnings call coming up, and you have to take this decision and that decision. They've never been there. So they don't know what that model will do in their lives. So, but they were also very successful because they brought something to the table that none of the other two had. So I was like, okay, I see all the strengths. And like you said, you know what? I think I'm going to combine all three. and I'd work on it now. I didn't know it was going to take me 21 years at that time, because it took me from 1998 to 2019 to be able to go through the compelling. That was the first 7 years. The credibility started also from the beginning, and I made sure I went through 5 industries. I made sure I went through the back office, because I realized that back office leadership, they thought differently from front office leaders. If you meet anybody from operations, from finance, from IT, they think very differently from people who run the P&L, very differently, right? So I've always wondered what's behind that. So I was always a front office person, but because of this, I made a detour. I went to the back office and I rose to be a CFO. So not bad. But I was able to understand their thinking, their approach to life, their views. I'll give you an example. They are always trying to minimize losses. Always trying to minimize losses. While the guys on the front end are looking to maximize opportunities, and willing to take on risks to do it. While these guys are like in trying to minimize losses, that means you don't want to take on risks. You want to limit the risk. And if it means limiting opportunities, they're fine with that. They're like, no, let's squeeze out the opportunities. We don't want that. And these guys are going, no, if we had hair, we'll be pulling it out. But understanding that both are legit, actually, and both of them, both thinking, coming together is the foundation of actually pragmatic optimism. You're fusing both mindsets together. You don't look at them and call them BPOs. In some organizations, that's what they call them. The back office people, they call them BPOs, business prevention officers.
Right.
So they're like, you guys are just there to throw spanners in our works. You don't know what it means to make a deal. You just go there and say no, 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 no. So there's always this tension, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I found. And you find that most CEOs, depending on where the company is, if the company is looking at, driving rah, 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 you find that people that make the CEO come from the front office. If that leader had messed up in the past and cost the company a lot of issues, guess the kind of CEOs, the CEO they get the lifetime from the back office. They'll go, you know what, enough of this front office people. We need discipline. You'll be hearing things like disciplined execution. That's when they bring in people from the back office, right? But ideally, it shouldn't be either or. It should be a combination, a fusion of both. And interestingly, that's what the pragmatic optimism is. It fuses both worlds. And we'll talk about that later. So let me jump the gun. So that's the story.
I love it. And I think you explained it. So many beautiful metaphors you use. I really like the one that you use with the hockey and all of a sudden they have to go into baseball, because it's true, right? It's like, oh, now I'm a people leader. Before I was just doing this that I loved. And not to say they don't love the humans, but they don't necessarily have the skills to be able to do it. And I think it's so important what you're saying there. Oh my gosh, like so many different places I can take you with what you just said. But I think that integrating is so important too, right? Because, and as you start to talk about the pragmatic optimist, all of one or all of the other is not going to serve. And I think that's why we need to have teams that are so diverse as well and be open to hearing the other perspectives. And you were even talking about when it comes to decision making, how some of the observations that you made is other people might be coming in when those crisis moments are there and saying, logically, I think this is what we should do. But that person who's in decision making is refusing to hear what they're having to say. And so to me, that takes a lot of self-awareness and taking a step back and being willing to listen and being able to hear. I talk a lot about, I don't know if you're familiar with the conscious leadership and their work around being above the line or below the line. And so when you're below the line, it's happening to me. When you're above the line, it's happening by me. And I think so often, and you did this a lot through the book, is helping people understand that it is a by me. And what does it look like to be able to take a step back and recognize how you can actually be being your worst enemy in this situation, and especially with crisis. And this is going to be what's going to be most difficult for me, Daniel, because there's so many places I could take you with this book because it's so rich, which again, that's why I recommend we're going to talk about these concepts, but to really get in lots more depth in the book. Right. But you think about stressful situations, quite often people will go back to their defaults and they're not going to necessarily show up as their best selves because they're in this moment where there's a lot of pressure on them and the emotions are intense.
Absolutely. And that was why I offered a different acronym than the common VUCA acronym, VUCA acronym for defining crisis, which usually just focuses on the organizational impact of crisis, organizational view of it. So I was looking at it from both the organization and the individuals within the organization, including the leaders. And also I talked about the risk, but the risk is not just to the organization, it's also to the leader and their careers and all that. So, and that feeds into how they make decisions, to the point that you made. So is the risk, is the impact, the stress, the emotions, negative emotions, the uncertainty, and the pressure. You bring all those together, that's the Rise Up acronym. You bring all of those together and bring it to bear on an individual, and that individual actually changes behavior and they show up with a different personality. And that's because the stress of a crisis alters our personality. And there's a lot of research in this area. That's the foundation of the research behind Hogan assessments, which I mentioned in the book. And I'm a Hogan certified consultant as well. So when I was going through it, I was like, hang on, this is crisis. This is you in a crisis situation. So what Hogan does is to look at Hogan generates 3 reports. The first is called your bright side, which is you showing up in your best self, okay? And the second is your dark side, which is what I just described now. And that is how you show up when you're under intense pressure. It's not like the first. A different you actually comes up. And that's why it's so easy to do things that you were not doing before and make mistakes that you would never make normally. So, and then the third report is called your inside, which is your motives and your values and what is driving you as a person. So all 3, when leaders understand them, they're able to know, okay, here is a crisis situation. And to your point, it heightens self-awareness. That is critical. Knowing where you are emotionally, it's critical. Just dismissing it, oh my goodness, it becomes the silent leader of the situation. And you wouldn't know that it has taken over. It takes over without you realizing it. That's what research has shown. And then only for you to look back at the trail of regrettable decisions that have been made.
Well, and I think you talk about a lot of different areas with this, which is so important, is understanding, okay, when this is happening, what are you going to do? What will your coping strategies look like? How are you going to take a step back and recognize what you need to take care of yourself in that moment when all of that is going on? And so I'd love for you to start there, right? So there might be a leader who's listening to this right now, and crisis, there's a whole spectrum of crisis, and they might be in a different place on that spectrum. And you even talk about where it's the beginning part or where you're already in it or when it's afterwards. Like there's all those different places that you go to right now. But someone might either be in a situation where there's stuff that are starting to bubble up, or they might just be thinking, actually, nothing is bubbling up, but I want to be really listening very carefully to what Daniel has to say right now. So the next time that situation happens, I'm not going to do what I did last time. I'm not going to go on my default. I'm going to handle this a bit differently. So for those leaders who are listening, what would you say to them?
It's so this is part of the book that I call Control Under Fire. And it opens up by saying that how you feel dictates how you lead. As much as we want to say that we are rational human beings, and as you've seen from my background, I come from a highly analytical background and highly rational background. But I can tell you that despite all of those numbers, all of those indices, all of those ratios and graphs and projections and simulations and all that, they get filtered through your emotional self. And at the end of the day, is it fear that is going to drive the conversation, or hope that is going to drive the conversation, or a fusion of both that would drive it? That is one of the key things that we need to recognize, that we can never be devoid of emotions, no matter how strong-willed you think you are. Because it's operating in the background, and it's like your operating system. I think that was the analogy I used in the book. If you have an iPhone, you don't ever think of iOS until you have to upgrade, right? But guess what? Your upgrading is happening simultaneously without your permission in your emotions. And so just like the iOS is happening, doing all that work in the background. All you are using are the apps, but those apps never work without connections to iOS. That is, so once you understand that, all of this rational thinking that you think you have, they are just apps sitting on your phone. You cannot use them without the iOS. So your rational thinking sits on your emotional being, which most of the time is running in an unconscious state. But what the book is challenging is for you to take a pause and to go, okay, I want to make this part conscious. I want to bring this part conscious, because the moment you bring it to your consciousness, you can massage it, you can tweak it, you can make amendments, and then send it back into the unconscious, bring it back to the conscious. You may need to do it a few times before you train your mind to put it on autopilot, and then you'll be able to lead that way. Those are some of the tools and the skills that I talked about in the book.
Yeah, and tell me a little bit more, because I mean, I'd love to be able to go through every single section here. And I'm even going to, just for people who haven't had an opportunity to read the book yet. So we talk about clarity and chaos. We talk about control under fire, conviction to act, concerted decision-making, conscientious communication, and connection to caring systems. You're such a great storyteller as well. I'm curious if you were to share in organization some of the things that were really surprising to you in these crisis moments around how leaders were showing up. And even for people listening right now, what you would have liked to have seen more of and what you would have liked to see less of.
So one of the key ones that jumped to my mind, and I mentioned it in my thesis itself, and also a bit in the book, was a leader who were just having a heart-to-heart conversation. He wasn't in a crisis or anything like that, and he just said, just out of the blues, he was the one that brought up crisis. I had even started researching on this, so this was maybe 12, 15 years ago. So and he just brought it up and he goes, you know what, Daniel, I really hate when things go out of control. I've always liked things to be organized and orderly. And the moment a crisis hits, it's like I just want to dive under my desk and hide away. and I had the drink in my mouth, and he just went flying, because I was just picturing him, and he's a big guy, jumping under his desk. And that was not the image that you would have if you ever met him. You would think, oh, he's somebody who's always in control, but he was sharing his deep, emotional state when it comes to a stressful situation and how he handles stressful situations. And I'll go, so okay, obviously you can't dive under your desk. So what do you do? And he goes, oh, I delegate it immediately. And then I noted that. But when I began my research, all the red flags just started going off, because you cannot delegate crisis response as a leader. Actually, a crisis is nothing other than a test of leadership. That's what the crisis is. So you cannot sidestep it successfully. You can definitely delegate it, but it will always come back to blow up in your face, always. So I found those kinds of responses. I also found responses that are like doom and gloom. Oh, the world is coming to an end. Like, no, it's a transaction that has failed, right? And yes, it's going to make you look bad. You're going to miss your numbers, but it's not the end of the world. And the ability to be able to ring fence negative events when they happen and limit them to where they've happened in reality, not because you're in denial, but because you've defined where that is, and you recognize that, well, this other whole is going well. That's a great skill to have, to be able to ring fence a crisis and not let it bleed into every area of our lives. Right. So that's another one. Then a third and final one is the happy-go-lucky thing. Crisis? What crisis? Nah, everything is great. Everything is great. We're going to hit our numbers. We're going to achieve this. and you know that that's not going to happen. You know, and but they will go, yeah, yeah, but I have to be hopeful. I have to project confidence. I was like, no, you're projecting, well, the first three words of confidence, but that's not confidence, that's con. You're projecting con.
Yeah. Yes, it's denial, right? And it reminds me even of that we've talked about the toxic positivity, right? Where that's that we have to acknowledge. Like I've even seen some of that when we talk about the pandemic and people coming back to work, and some people aren't ready to go back to work, and the way of approaching is like, oh, come on, everyone, it's great. It's no, acknowledge that, like, we understand how that must feel. We understand how it's hard. We understand over the last 2 years it looked this way, and now all of a sudden we're asking you and to communicate and acknowledge and validate people's feelings. And when I hear the denial piece, like, that makes it even harder for the people, because they're like, well, now I have even less trust with you because you're saying, like, you're pretending it's not happening.
That denial is on the top of the 10 things I listed on how not to respond to a crisis. Denial. That to me, I think is one of the it's one of the most disingenuous things that leaders do. And it doesn't matter whether they're being overtly optimistic or pessimistic. Both of them are susceptible to it.
Yeah.
Right. But the bottom line is they've not acknowledged that there's something going on. And you find out that in wider research, forget about crisis, nothing to do with crisis, just wider research, you find out that there's a dichotomy between the view of staff and view of management.
Yes.
It's always a huge gap. And the best organizations are the ones that bring them closest to each other.
Yes.
They hardly will overlap, but bring them closest to each other. And I'll give you an example. Microsoft just announced the result of a study last week.
Yeah.
About 20,000 people participated in that study globally. So it was a huge study
Yeah.
of employees and management, so staff and management.
Mm-hmm.
And the question was, yes, I am as productive or even more productive when I work from home, right? That as in the office.
Mm-hmm.
And the manager were to say, yeah, whether they agreed to that or not. And the results showed that 87% of staff said, yes, we are as productive or at a minimum as productive or sometimes more productive
Yeah.
when we're working remotely versus in the office.
Mm.
Guess what?
Mm.
80% of managers disagreed with that. I mean, how wide is this chasm that we're talking about? You also see that chasm in culture.
Mm-hmm.
So organizational culture or values. Management will go, here are our values. It's
Yes.
A, B, C.
Yeah.
And if they've been trained in communications, they repeat it everywhere. They put it in stories, they put it in mementos, they put it everywhere.
Yes.
But employees come in and they're witnessing and experiencing X, Y, Z for American
Yes.
listeners, or Z for the Canadians.
Yes.
That's what they're experiencing. And management is preferring A, B, C. But
Mm.
the experience in the organization is totally different. Research says that whenever you have that dichotomy,
Yeah.
guess what? The behavior will tend towards the reality in the organization, not what is being said.
Yes.
So
Yes.
what is being said gets put aside and the reality becomes reinforced. Yeah.
It's funny, you're reminding me when you're saying this, they were doing an engagement survey and asking different questions, and it was getting into like the values and the behaviors, and in asking employees, do you feel like the leaders are demonstrating these behaviors so that are aligned with the values? And the employees were like, no, no, no. And then the leader said, well, this isn't true. Like, this is like, was not even willing. Like, we've got a whole bunch of feedback from the employees saying, no, I do not see those behaviors being lived out day in and day out. And so great. Thank you, employees, for giving us this feedback, because that means there's not an alignment and there's an opportunity for change. And here we have the leader saying, well, that's not true.
So as a consultant and also in my corporate career, I've been in rooms where we're debriefing with senior management on the output of an employee survey, a pulse check or
Yes.
whatever name that they call it. But you're polling employees to say, what are your views?
Yes.
And really with the plan of taking it in and making adjustments. But there was one particular one, and I remember, and there's so many like this, but let me just hone in on one particular one. And I listened to the discussion after putting all the results on the screen, and a discussion for 45 minutes. And then it was my turn to speak, and I said, have you noticed that for the past 45 minutes, here's a summary of what we've just said. We've said employees are wrong, and we are right. That's just what you. So what's the purpose of doing a survey like this? What's the purpose if you're going to only accept things that align with what you want, and then dismiss the majority of the input of those who are leaving it? Because going back on the denial thing, research also shows that the higher your income in a private sector organization, the higher your propensity to deny that there's a crisis. And this has been done. And this was actually done by my supervisor, who supervised my doctoral study. She partnered with somebody else to do this study, and she published it just last year. No, or early this year. I think early this year. A few months. Yeah, early this year. And it was such a revealing thing, because that was what I've experienced. You find that management will go, crisis, what crisis? No, we're fine. Everything is great. Whereas people in the front lines are going, no, clients are leaving. We're losing this, we're losing that. So it appears that the greater your responsibility in the organization, the greater your tendency for deniability. That's how I've explained that.
Yes.
So be aware before you dismiss. Don't think that you're being smart by dismissing. Actually, that is actually a default of leaders, to dismiss. Okay. So when you're saying that, when you're feeling that, drive to dismiss, take a pause and ask questions. Ask more questions. Let your response be in form of questions and inquiries, and trying to get behind the thinking instead of being dismissive. Because you can dismiss so many things. You cannot dismiss a crisis. It's here to stay. It will not go away. It will get worse. So you shouldn't be dismissive. Pause and ask the questions and join your team to get to the root of it.
Yeah, I mean, I always am such a big believer in tuning into curiosity. Curiosity in many ways, right? Curious around yourself and why you're behaving the way. Because I think you explained really well that, crisis moments are those opportunities that you could really up level your leadership, right? Because it's not about what goes on in the day to day. Yes, we still want in the day to day a non-crisis situation for you to still be showing up as a leader, and who you're being is of course important, but the opportunity is actually in those moments you're going to grow into an even better version of yourself, because you're now using all of these tools that are helping you, like, okay, in this moment, I know my default wants to go here. I want to hide, I want to run, I want to point fingers, I want to blame, all of these things. Yet I'm going to consciously choose, I'm going to show up differently here. And then you're building that muscle, and you get to take that forward in other situations.
And great point, Kristen. And that's because there is no time in the life cycle of an organization where leadership is most needed than during a crisis. There's something about a crisis. One of the participants in my study, over 40 years experience on the board of several organizations. And he said this, he said, Daniel, there's something about a crisis that makes everybody look up. He said, people don't look down in a crisis. They look up to the leader to go, what do we do?
Yes.
How should we respond to this? And something else that I found in my research and in my personal experience is that leaders have a tremendous level of goodwill from their people when they're facing a crisis because the people want to get out of it. So they're willing to give you the benefit of doubt. They're willing to go the extra mile. They're willing to forgive any misstep. They know that you are, as long as you're being sincere, you will make mistakes. They're not going to dwell on it. No, they are on your side. And they want to see you succeed. But unfortunately, many leaders blow that opportunity. They blow it away and mishandle it, and they don't harness it. What I went into the book is to teach you how to harness that goodwill, that camaraderie. Number one, by learning to externalize your own feelings about what is going on and to do it in a constructive way. So I call it externalization of optimism. You need to be able to externalize it in a way that is believable, not in a pie in the sky kind of way, in a way that recognizes the dire situation, the critical situation, and the perversity that is going on, but also being conscious to say, but despite all this, we will find a way out. I trust us. I trust you. We will, let us rally. We have to find a way. And that's why, someone said leaders are dealers in hope. Napoleon Bonaparte. That's it. He was a military leader. You don't bring in leaders, you don't bring in soldiers. You can bring them by conscription, but for them to do what you want them to do, they need to buy into you. And from what we're seeing so far, that looks like that's what Russia is struggling with. They've conscripted people, but there's no willingness to fight. And that's what I talked about in the book. You need to create a willingness to fight. That willingness is what, the military history and military theorists, they say that the power of any military is calculated by two attributes. Number one, the power of their equipment and their capabilities. So the manpower, the equipment, and all that, that's one. He said the second is the power of their will. How willing are they to put their lives on the line? That's the second thing. And that is the conviction to act that I talked about in the book. When you show conviction yourself, you create conviction in other people. And they see that thing from your lens and they are committed to it, you will go places and your leadership will get onto a higher level because crisis never leaves a leader the same way. It does not. It does not. It either batters your leadership and all of a sudden you've actually lost credence in the view of your people, or it takes it to a higher level of quality and people begin to respect you even more. And you yourself begin to get more confident in your area of leadership. Crisis leadership is not a field of leadership, is where leadership is field tested.
So good. So good. Oh my gosh, Daniel, I could listen to you talk about this for hours. I want to give people an opportunity to learn more about you, but I always also like to give my guests an opportunity to leave a final thought. I mean, I think what you just said there was incredibly powerful. However, this is your opportunity. So what shows up for you around all of this, if you were to summarize as a final thought, whatever is on your mind right now?
Wow, thank you. A blank check. And I need to be surgical. Okay, here goes. A time of crisis is a time where your leadership is put under spotlight. Leaders mostly suffer from the spotlight effect, which is a feeling of having all eyes on them, right? But in reality, people are not really thinking about you like that, right? So get off your high horse, right? That's not what people are thinking about. But in a crisis, all eyes are really on you. But, and I said in the book that leaders suffer from the reverse spotlight effect, which is they don't realize how much People really depend on them during a crisis. So that's what I want you to like reflect on that. And they're depending on you to see them through. And every one of them, whether they're being, you know, like you said, when crisis happens, everybody goes into their corners. The pessimistic ones become overtly pessimistic, and the optimistic one just wants to sweep everything under the carpet, that everything is right. You want to be able to pull those two groups together and find a unity between them, and create what I call the pragmatic optimist, which rejects deliberately certain aspects of optimism and certain aspects of pessimism, but accept specific aspects of both of them. And I'll give an example. For the pessimism part that the leader embraces is that the pessimist knows exactly what is going on, what is going wrong. So that clear-eyed view on what is going on, you need it. You need it. You have somebody in your team who is always like calculating what's going on. Bring them closer. Let them do it, right? Don't go, oh, here you go, wet blankets, and throw them out of your office. No. And another part is the pessimists also recognize their limitation. They're going, you know what? We can only do so far. We don't have capabilities to do more. An optimist will go, bring it on. We will do it. We will do it until they drown. So that clear-eyed view on the limit of your capabilities and knowing when to ask for help, very critical. So so that's the pessimistic side. The optimistic side that they hold on is that an optimist that they hold on, that is important here, is a solution-minded person. Someone who is not just saying that tomorrow will be better and that's it. No, you ignore that. That is called Pollyannaism. Okay, so you want to ignore being Pollyanna, right? You reject that. The one you will accept is tomorrow will be better, and I and my team can do something about making it better. So you take on personal responsibility for it. And a second part also to round up is of optimism that you should look to embrace is a proper explanation, internal explanation of what is going on. A well-trained optimist who has learned the skill will not personalize a crisis. Many leaders personalize crisis. In fact, one of them said, and I quoted in the book, is that the crisis almost feel like a personal attack on me, right? It's like crisis is going around going, okay, Kirsten, I'm coming for you now. No, that's why it works. So don't personalize it, because the moment you do, you will begin to make the wrong decisions. Okay, dissociate yourself from it. See it as what it is and define it within the confines of its parameters that you've allowed your pessimistic side to help you define. And then you begin to apply resources to attack it. It doesn't matter whether this is organizational crisis we're talking about or personal crisis. Actually, the more you're able to do this on a personal level and you do it well, those are the skills you will take into the office. Because I'm of the opinion, as I said before we started the podcast, is that when you meet a professional, when you meet an executive, when you meet a leader, when you meet anybody, an entrepreneur, you're actually meeting two people. You're meeting the entrepreneur developing that new product, but you're also meeting the person that is wrapped around the character. Most people just look at the professional and they ignore the person. The professional is great on the technical side of things, even on the managerial side of things, because management is the organization of technical activities, but the leadership part of it sits on your person. Therefore, for you to change as a leader, you need to change as an individual first. And surprise, surprise, when I went into the history of crisis research, it actually began with people's private, personal crisis, health crisis that we will all face at some point in our lives. Health crisis. So chronic health crisis, that's the foundation of crisis research. All of crisis. So 50, 60, 70 years ago, that was the foundation of crisis research, because it all begins with the person. always begins with a person, and it's that person that needs to change. So as you're reading the book, as you're listening to this podcast, you're asking yourself three questions. What do I need to stop doing? What do I need to start doing? And what do I need to continue doing? If you just pick just one and you work on that, and people around you begin to notice that change, boom, you've become a better version of yourself.
Beautiful. And anyone who's been listening to the podcast is very used to me saying these exact things, that you're a whole person, and personal and professional, they merge all day long, constantly. And as we evolve as a human. Daniel, where can people learn more about you and your work?
My website, the corporate website, is Resolute, no E at the end, consulting.com. So resoluteconsulting.com. I'm on LinkedIn, so just my name, Daniel Monehin on LinkedIn. Let's connect. And my book is available on Amazon as well. I'm really grateful to the response, Kristen. Within 6 hours of the announcement of the book, it shot up to #1 on Amazon Hot New Releases. So
Wow.
really, really excited about the reception that it's gotten, and so many university libraries and business school libraries are buying them now, buying the book in quantities, large quantities, and distributing in the organization, because this is not one thing that may happen. The crisis will happen, but most importantly, your behavior in a crisis, and this is from research, is the strongest predictor of your leadership quality. How you show up in a time of crisis is one of the strongest predictors of the quality of the leadership that you have.
So true. Thank you so much for being here today, Daniel.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Time flew so quickly.
And so quickly. And for everybody, wherever you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're sending tons of love. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.